And we are ready to start. Today we are going to discuss the inner aspects, the insights to the holiday of Purim. Coming up quite quickly. We're excited about Purim. We've known so much about Purim. In fact, we know so much about Purim that the children in the Hebrew school always complain. They say, Rabbi, again we'll talk about Purim, again Passover, again Rosh Hashanah. We already know this from last year. It's boring. Why do I keep on coming back to Hebrew school? I don't want to know this stuff. And so I attempt to the best of my ability to explain to these wonderful children that it's true, you already know the story of Purim, and that's fantastic. But today we're going to go into the story of Purim a little bit deeper. And that's what we're going to do here. Of course, we all know the story with Mordechai, Esther, King Achashverosh, and the wicked Haman, boo to Haman, and the miracle that we celebrate that the Jews were saved from the annihilation of Achashverosh and the wicked Haman. But what is the deeper meaning? And let's uncover some of the mystical teachings of the story of Purim. In fact, throughout the history of the Jewish people, specifically throughout the history of the Chabad movement, the Lubavitcher Rebbeim used to share many Hasidic discourses, insights specifically on the story of Purim. So today we're going to talk about one specific Hasidic discourse, and we're going to try to analyze it and apply it to our daily life. There was once this not very smart man who was traveling, and he was on the road and a terrible storm breaks out. And so he looks for an local hotel to stop in, and he finally finds a roadside inn. He goes inside and he asks for a room. The man tells him, sorry, all our rooms are taken. There are no available rooms. He says, please, I'm just one guy. All I need is one bed. He says, listen, the army came here and they took our entire hotel. There's nothing we can do. I don't have anything for you. He says, please, all I need is one bed. That's all I need, a bed. So the owner of the inn feels bad for this poor guy. It's raining outside. It's cold. He says, you know what? I actually have one bed. But this bed is in the room that the general is sleeping in. His room has a beds in the room, and there's an extra bed in there. The general asked me to wake him up at 5:30 in the morning. He likes to get up early, go to the gym. If I wake you up at 5 o'clock in the morning and you leave the room before the general gets up, I'll let you stay in that room. The man says, perfect, no problem, happy. Sleep in the night, 5 o'clock, wake me up, no problem. And so, sure enough, the guy goes to sleep. At 5 o'clock in the morning, the owner of the inn knocks on the door and wakes him up. And he gets dressed. It's dark outside, so he gets dressed. And he thanks the innkeeper and he leaves the hotel. He goes to the train station, and as he's waiting for his train, he sees the train pulls up to the station, and through the window, he sees his own reflection. And he sees that he's wearing the general's clothing. So he says, oh, silly innkeeper, he woke up the general by mistake. And so, of course, the story of Purim is many times we put on costumes. We get dressed in the holiday of Purim. Oftentimes, unfortunately, we think that the costume that we're wearing is really who we are. We have to remember it's simply a costume. We are much more than that. So we're going to talk about today what exactly we are and who we are and what is our relationship with the holiday of Purim. We're going to begin to focus today on chapter number 6 in the book of the story of Purim. A little background, just to give a general overview of the story of Purim. King Ahashverosh held a great banquet in the capital city of Shushan, and he invited everyone to come and attend the banquet. He was so excited that everybody was there. He then goes and invites his queen Vashti to appear. She does not come to appear at the banquet. And as a result of this, King Achashverosh is infuriated. He orders that she should be killed. And now King Achashverosh is stuck without a queen. And he sends out messengers throughout the land that all the beautiful women should come line up and he's going to pick a new queen. This is based on the suggestions of his advisors. And so Esther, the young, beautiful Jewish girl, Mordechai's niece, hopes that she doesn't get picked out, but because she's a citizen of Shushan, she has to show up, and she shows up, and sure enough, although everyone else was dressed in their finest clothing with makeup galore, she came with nothing on, believing that she would not be chosen, and unfortunately, King Achashverosh found favor in his eyes, and she found favor in Achashverosh's eyes, and he picks her to be his new queen. Mordechai, Esther's uncle, sees what's going on, and he can't stand to see his poor niece sitting in the palace. And so he decides he's going to keep an eye on her. And he hangs out at the doorway of the palace, at the entranceway, and he listens to see what's going on inside the palace, how his niece is doing. One day, he's sitting there, and he hears two guards plotting to kill the king, Bigsan and Seresh. Now, Ahashverosh was a king that had made this huge party, and this party lasted for weeks and weeks and weeks, and he invited everybody to come. These two guards didn't like this fact that he was giving attention to other people, and decided they wanted to kill King Achashverosh. Mordechai, who at the time was the head of the Sanhedrin, the high court in the city of Jerusalem, knew all 70 languages that were spoken in the world, and the civilized world at that time. This was one of the great requirements of the heads of the Sanhedrin, the high court, to be able to communicate with anybody that comes in with a case. You have to know and be proficient in all these languages. So Mordechai knew all the languages, and when he saw that the Jews were in danger, he left Jerusalem and he came to the city of Shushan. Now he's sitting at the city of Shushan at the entrance of the palace, and he hears Bigsan and Seresh plotting to kill the king. And he hears this story. Although they were talking in another language, he goes to Esther and he says, Esther, Bigsan and Seresh want to kill the king. Go tell Achashverosh that this is the plan. And this is how they want to do it. Achashverosh goes and investigates, and indeed, he sees that it is true. And now he goes and he finds the two, Bigsan and Seresh, and he kills them for trying to kill the king. This is the story that the Megillah tells us. And then the Megillah goes on. And he says, in the meantime, there was a Haman who wanted to wipe out the Jewish people. And he was finding all sorts of ways. He was an advisor to the king, how he can go and how he can kill the king, how he can kill the Jewish people, because they were Am Echad, they were a nation that was spread out all across the entire land, the 127 countries that Achashverosh was the leader of. And Haman devises the plan to kill the Jews. And one of the things that Haman asks King Achashverosh to do is to sign a proclamation that every citizen should bow down to Haman, as he is, and he saw himself as being this great leader who deserves the honor. Mordechai, of course, would not bow down to Haman. Mordechai said, I bow down only to Hashem, only to God as a Jew. And he instructed the Jewish people to do this, and this infuriated Haman. How could Mordechai not bow down to me? And he decided, that's it, I am going to wipe out Mordechai and his people, the entire Jewish nation. But when should he wipe them out? And so he casts a lot, which is called a Pur or Purim in plural, which is why we call the holiday of Purim after these lottery, and he chose the month of Adar to kill the Jewish people. When Mordechai discovered this decree, he took to the streets in mourning. He tore his clothes and he instructed the Jewish people of Persia to fast, which is modern day Iraq, modern day Iran. And he's told them all to fast and told them to pray to God, asking God to nullify this decree. Mordechai sat at the entrance of the palace in sackcloth, mourning this terrible decree and refusing to bow down to Haman. Every time Haman walked past the palace and saw Mordechai, he got even more upset. So finally the night came when Haman arrived early at the palace to tell Achashverosh that now I want to wipe out the Jewish people. That night, Achashverosh could not sleep. And this is the story that we are going to talk about now. Balayla hahu, that night, Achashverosh could not sleep. He was tossing and turning. Now, what do you do when you can't sleep during the night? What Achashverosh decided to do was to open up a book, and he's going to start to read. Now, he himself didn't want to read, so he asked his advisors to read. The commentaries tell us, the Medrash tells us, that the advisors that were standing at the bedside of Achashverosh were actually two of the sons of Haman himself. But they saw that the page that they opened up to was a story about Mordechai, the arch nemesis of their father Haman. They tried to turn the page, miraculously kept on coming back to that page. So Achashverosh said, tell me already, what does it say in that book? Tell me what it says. And so they read the book, and it says over there that Mordechai saved the king's life. And he was never rewarded for saving the king's life, which, by the way, was another miracle that the individual who wrote down the story, which is another one of Haman's kids, in Achashverosh's book, he omitted Esther from the story. He wanted to minimize the Jewish influence that they had on Achashverosh. And so he took out Esther's name. And what was left? Only the story of Mordechai saving the king. And right now, King Achashverosh says, well, nobody does a favor. Nobody saves the king's life and is not rewarded for it. Therefore, we must reward Mordechai. The Medrash tells us that Achashverosh had a dream that night, which is why he couldn't sleep. And he had a terrible nightmare. In that dream, he saw Haman with a sword coming to kill him. And when he read the story that Mordechai saved his life, he says, wait a second, there must be a connection. I have to save, and I have to give a gift. I have to honor the person who saves my life. Let me do something for Mordechai. And so he asks the advisor, he says, tell me, who is outside? He was still remembering the dream that he had. And they tell him that Haman is outside. Now he panicked. Why is Haman outside 6 o'clock in the morning? Obviously, he's coming to kill me. That's what Achashverosh thought. So the moment he heard that Haman was outside, his dream came back to him, and the purpose of why Haman was there, what he thought why Haman was there, came to haunt him. And so Megillus Esther, the scroll of Esther, tells us that he called on Haman and he said, what are you doing here? And he says, what should I do to a man who the king wants to honor? And Haman tells him you should put him on royal garments and you should put him on a royal horse and give him the royal treatment and parade him through the city. Haman was sure that he's talking about himself. And so King Achashverosh says, okay, go do this to Mordechai Yehudi, Mordechai the Jew, as this is how I want to reward him. We're going to stop over here. We'll finish the story next week. But we want to stop on this beginning of chapter 6. The story tells us that after Achashverosh could not sleep through the night, he was restless and he asks for the book that has all the actions that have been written in there, all the things that people have done to him should be brought to him. All the commentaries ask a similar question. What part of the story of Mordechai and Esther, Achashverosh and Haman, is the exact moment that the miracle and the tide began to change for the favor of the Jewish people? Was it when Mordechai didn't bend down to Achashverosh? Was it to Haman, Was it when Esther was picked to be the queen of Achashverosh? What exactly was the moment that it was the time that the miracle begins? So many commentaries say the miracle began when Achashverosh was not able to sleep. That's when the miracle begins. In fact, in the synagogue, there's a law that when we read the Megillah, you read the scroll of Esther, we are to raise our voices, lift up the voice when we begin to read chapter 6. So we say, Balayla haho, on that night when Achashverosh could not sleep, he calls in the readers of the book and asks them to tell him what it says in that book. We raise our voice because that is the beginning of the miracle. What do we call Ahashverosh throughout the scroll of Esther? He is known as King Ahashverosh. Why is he called King Ahashverosh? It is true, he was a king over the 127 countries, and it's true that he was the most powerful king of all times, and it's true that he was the grandchild of Darius, and it was true that also he was in charge of the vessels that was looted for the Holy Temple after destruction of the first Holy Temple. Remember, this story takes place between the time of the first temple and the second temple. All this is very true. But there's also a hint in the story. And in fact, every nuance of the story of Mordechai, Esther, King Achashverosh, and Haman, and the sons of Haman, and big son and Seresh, and Zerah, all the people, the characters in the story of the scroll of Esther are really an analogy, the Kabbalists tell us, for our own life. And when it talks about King Achashverosh, is actually referring to the Almighty God. Because in truth, there's only one king, and that is the King of all kings, the God himself. In many of the scrolls of Esther, each page begins with the word Hamelech, the king, to signify this idea that God is the ultimate king. In the Chabad tradition, we do not have the top letter of each page to say Hamelech. But the point is that the word Hamelech, the king, is referencing also God. There's a story with the holy Rabbi Yitzchak of Deitsch. He was known to be a very passionate individual, a very exciting person. And there was a meeting that was called in the city of Deitsch, and they wanted to invite the town rabbi, Rabbi Yitzchak, to come and participate. But they were afraid that if they invited him, he's going to disrupt the meeting. Because you never know when he's going to have his outbursts and start yelling and singing in a good way, singing the praises of God, singing the greatness of the Almighty, singing the greatness of the world that we live in, and all the beautiful things. He would just get excited about the blessings that we have in our life. So they're afraid he was going to disrupt the meeting. And so they told him, they said, yeah, but we want you to come to the meeting, but on one condition, that you don't disrupt the meeting. You have to promise you're not going to have any outbursts, because that's too hard for us. So he said, I promise, no problem, agreed. I will have no outbursts. Okay, very good. So they invite him to come, and he sits down in the meeting, and the waiter comes around offering platters of food. And he says, this is the appetizer. And for the main course, you have a choice. Would you love to have fish, or would you love to have chicken? So Rabbi Yitzchak says, love. I love God. Only love God. Of course I love God. I love God with all my heart, all my soul, all my might. And he starts to jump up on the chair. I love God. I love God. I love God. And he jumps up on the table and screaming how much he loves God. The moment you heard the word you love, you can only think of one love. Who do I love? Only God. And so a similar thing here is also, we mentioned King Achashverosh. When you hear the word king, what do you think about? Of course, God. Who else is the king? Only God is the king. So it's an automatic reaction. The moment we say the word king, yes, talking about God. Absolutely. If we're talking about God, now we have a problem though. Because we just said that the king, Ahashverosh, could not sleep. How could, if we're talking about God, how can we say that God could not sleep? In other words, can we say that God even does go to sleep? The fact that we're saying that God can't sleep, that means sometimes he sleeps, and now he can't sleep. How can we say that God can't sleep? That's the question. Question number one. Question number two. There's a known verse, and that is, Hine lo yonam v'lo yishan shomei Yisrael, that God, the protector of Israel, doesn't sleep nor slumber. God does not sleep and slumber. In fact, if he was sleeping, who's going to watch over the Jewish people? So again, what does it mean that he couldn't sleep? And furthermore, why couldn't he sleep? Why was God not able to sleep on this night? If all other nights he was able to sleep, what happened tonight that God was not able to sleep? And so from here we learn that the beginning of the miracle actually happened that night that God couldn't sleep. Up until now, Haman was antagonizing, harassing the Jewish nation, making their life difficult. Mordechai was sitting, their leader was sitting in sackcloth at the entrance of the palace. Things did not look very good for the Jewish people. All of a sudden, once they're ready in this position, now God says, I can't sleep. What happened that God's sleep was interrupted? And this is based, like we said, on a Maimon, on a Hasidic discourse that the Rabbi said with the title, Balayla Hahu. On that night, sleep evaded the king. And he says like this. According to some opinions, the answer to this question lies in the Medrash. And the Medrash says that the king who couldn't sleep is referring to God, the God of the universe. The force of the miracles is that God couldn't sleep. All of a sudden, when God's children are in such a position of such danger that they're going to be wiped out, all of a sudden, God says, wait a second. This cannot be. I have to remain there to protect the Jewish people. There's a general concept in life, and that is that life is a mirror. The Talmud tells us that when you see something wrong in somebody else, you should know that that is simply a reflection of yourself. You have that same issue. Which is why the verse tells us, Kamayim hapanim apanim. When a person looks into the water, their face reflects the water. And just as a face is reflected in the water, so does one man's heart reflect another heart. When you see something good in the person, that means you have that good trait also. And if this is so with human beings, how much more so it is so with God. In fact, King David says that Hashem, that God is our shadow. Hashem Shemrecha, Hashem Tzilcha Yad Yaminecha. The Lord is our guardian. The Lord is our shadow. He is by your right hand. When you walk on the street at night and the street lamps are lit up, there will be a shadow. And any move that you make, the shadow will follow you. You lift up your hand, the shadow will follow you. You put it down, you go to the right, to the left, the shadow follows you. The same thing is also God. God is our shadow. When we move somewhere, God follows us. When we go somewhere else, God follows us. Wherever we go, God goes with us. And the same thing, hopefully, is in reverse. That God moves and we are God's shadow. That we reflect and we follow the moves that God makes. We want to mimic God and be there the way God wants us to be there. And so once we understand this general idea, that life is like a mirror. By the way, life is so much like a mirror that oftentimes all we are excited about is the mirror itself. We forget what's behind the mirror. A mirror is simply a piece of glass that is coated with silver. So often in life, the silver, the glitter, the money, the gold become such an integral part of our life that all we see is our own reflection. We don't see through the window and to see somebody else that may be in need. So the metaphor for the mirror is very deep. But for now, God is our reflection or our shadow, the Baal Shem Tov tells us. And he says like this, that in good times, the reflection that God has is a good reflection. But sometimes the Jewish nation may be in a state of sleep. They may be in the state that they are not awake. They're not aware of what they're doing. They're not conscious of the ways that they're behaving, the ways that they're living. And they are therefore spiritually sleeping. And if they're spiritually sleeping, then what does that mean for God? That God is also sleeping. Because God is the reflection and our shadow. So if we're sleeping, God is also sleeping. And at the time of the story of Purim, when Achashverosh invited everyone to come to his party, even the Jewish people participated in the party. This bothered Mordechai, who was the leader. He tried to say no. Although King Achashverosh is offering kosher food and kosher wine, it's not a place where Jewish persons should hang out. You don't belong in the palace. You don't belong eating and dining with all the people that are there. That's not the way a Jew behaves. But the Jews wouldn't listen to him. That all this good food, all this good music, these delicacies that they never saw in their life, they said, we want to follow the ways of the nation. And so what happens? When the soul descends into this world and we become like the world, we sometimes forget about the role that we have, the spiritual purpose of why we were created in order to be an influencer, not to be influenced by our surroundings. And the moment we come into that position where we're being influenced by the surroundings, we spiritually go to sleep. And this is reflected in God also, the protector of Israel, unfortunately going to sleep. But let's go a little bit deeper. Let's understand the concept of sleep for a moment. Why did anybody know why did the boy go to sleep wearing his glasses? Because he wanted to see his dreams. Do you know what happens when you go to sleep on top of your smartphone? You end up downloading an app. An app, you know, you got it. Yeah, okay. All right. Where do books go to sleep at night? Under their covers. Okay. Should we say a few more or that's enough for now? Okay, we'll stop now. We'll stop here. Okay, all right. One more. Why did the boy run around his bed? He wanted to catch up on sleep. All right. Okay. All right. So what is the idea of sleep? A state of sleep in this world is a reference to the world of exile, to a time where godliness is hidden from us. When the verse says that I am asleep, referring to God, it means that God is asleep in exile. What does that mean? A state of exile is similar to a state of darkness. In a state of redemption, we're alive, we're awake. In a state of exile, we're tired, we're fatigued. Okay? Intellectually also, when a person is in a state of freedom, we can think broader. When a person is in a state of exile, our brains are scattered, our brains are confined, limited. It's hard for us to have this broadness, have this capacity to be able to reach further than we normally can. So the world is in a state of either being awake or being asleep. In the times of the Holy Temple, it was time of redemption. The world stood in a state of awakeness. In the times of exile, the world stood in a state of sleeping. Let's be a little bit more specific. We know that sleep begins the moment a person closes their eyes. Now, if you think about it, everything about the person is exactly the same. Their hands, their feet, their stomach, their nose, mouth, everything is exactly the same when you're sleeping than when you're awake. The only difference is that when you're sleeping, you're standing up, and when you're sleeping, you're lying down. But the body, the physical structure of your body is exactly the same. So what changes from when you sleep to when you're awake? And why is it that when you're sleeping, all of a sudden, you start to think about all these crazy things, all these fantastical ideas, all these incredible inventions, sometimes also nightmares? What happens when we're sleeping? According to the Kabbalists, when we go to sleep, 2/3 of our soul goes back up to the place where the souls hang out in order to be recharged, or 1/60th of our soul goes up to be recharged. Just like your phone, when your phone dies at night, you plug it in to recharge it. Hopefully, we don't charge our phones in our bedroom. Before my kids get a cell phone, one of the things I tell them is, the condition is that you cannot go to sleep with your cell phone in your room. It has to be charged outside of your bedroom. Studies have been done, and it's been proven that when someone goes to sleep with their cell phone in their room, they have a terrible night's sleep. They're always checking it. Last thing they do before they go to sleep, and the first thing they do when they wake up is they check their phone. It's not a healthy way to go to sleep. It's not a Jewish way to go to sleep. Plug it outside your room. So just like at night, you want to recharge your phone, we have to recharge our souls. We go to sleep, we close our eyes, and our souls ascend to the heavens to be recharged. And the morning comes back to us, and we begin our day by saying, thank you, Lord, for returning the soul to me. My faithfulness in you is great. But this stage of going to sleep, we're not dead, we're still alive, but we enter into a stage of subconsciousness, or not completely conscious. What does that mean? We can still hear, we can still feel, we still know that we're there, but yet we're in a semi-comatose state, which is why we can enter into a stage or a place where we can see two opposites occur at the same time. The Talmud says you can even see an elephant fit through a hole that is the size of a needle. You can see things that are impossible to happen on a normal state. Ever notice that when you have a nightmare, you always wake up before the nightmare finished? The antagonizer was never caught. The villain was never captured. Why is it? Why is it that when we have a nightmare and you're locked in a closet and someone comes in with a knife and wants to kill you, and the second before the knife comes through, all of a sudden you wake up in a deep cold sweat? The person disappeared. Why don't you capture the guy? Why don't you run after the person and get him? The nightmare never ends good. Why not? And the truth is, when we have a nightmare, it is actually a reflection of what's going on inside of us. That this is a task that we have throughout the day, is to capture the villain, capture the person that's trying to hurt us, that wants to control us. And so during our sleep, a lot is happening, but we're all there, but yet we're not there. Exile is compared to a state of sleep. We're there, we think we're there, we're fully there, our body, our feet, everything is there, but we're not there. We're missing a couple screws, as they say, a couple of marbles. What is not in a crazy way, but in a crazy way. We don't behave in a normal manner when we're in exile. The biggest proof is that we think we're normal. The more normal we think we are, the crazier we are. You ever went into a place where people have unfortunately had a nervous breakdown? The more you talk to them, the more convinced they are that they're normal, and you're the one that's not normal. In a state of exile, we're in a state of spiritual sleep where we think that we have it all. We think we figured it all out, but we're really in a state of darkness. And this is why we can be in a state of complete disarray. Things can be all over the place. In your dream, the chances are that nothing is organized. Everything is all over the place. It's a big mess. Life is a big mess for a very, very simple reason. What happens when a room is dark? You cannot see how to clean it up. So we're in a state of darkness. Automatically, you're in a state of disorganization. You're in a state of things all scattered all over the place. You're in a place of danger. When you're walking, when it's dark outside, it's a good chance somebody left a toy on the floor and you may trip over it. Hopefully not. When it's light, you're not going to trip on it. But when it's dark, you may trip over it. So darkness symbolizes a time when you're not organized, when the world is not organized, when I'm not organized, when my mind is all over the place, flying in 1,000 of directions at once. And the craziest thing is that we think that we have it all figured out. But in the times of redemption, in the times of the Holy Temple, in the times of the Beis HaMikdash, when the temple stood, you're able to see miracles. We're able to see the hand of God in a perfectly organized, meticulous manner. Everything was there the way it's supposed to be. Everything happened in an orderly fashion. You know the story with this guy that was seen looking for his watch on the street under the light post. So someone says, "Oh, what did you lose?" He said, "I lost my watch." He said, "Can I help you find it?" He says, "Sure." So they're looking. He says, "Where did you lose your watch?" He said, "I lost it over there." He says, "So why are you looking over here?" He says, "Over here, there's light." That is a stage of exile. When we think that it's light and we think we're going to find what we're looking for, but really we're just feeling around in the darkness. So what happened over here? The Jewish nation was in a state of exile. They were not living in Israel. These Jews that were living in Shushan, they were under the kingdom of Achashverosh, King Achashverosh, a wicked man or a silly man. Haman wanted to wipe them out because he saw that he can get the Jewish people to follow in his ways. He can get them to listen to them. He can get them to bow down to him. Mordechai, the light unto the nation, the leader of the Jewish people, said, "No, hold on a second. It's true the temple is not here, and we're in a state of exile, but we have to stand strong and firm and know that God is going to rebuild the temple. We cannot be in a state of exile. We can't live in a state of exile. We have to live in a redemptive state while still in exile. We have to be awake. We can't be asleep." And the moment that happened, Mordechai got this message to the Jewish people. All of a sudden, who couldn't sleep? The king couldn't sleep. God couldn't sleep. Let's understand exactly what happened over here. Mordechai saw these Jewish children and he said, "Wait, my dear fellow children, what are you learning?" And they said, "We're learning Al Tira Mipachat Pisa. I'm learning the verse not to be afraid of anyone." And he says, "What are you learning?" He asks another boy. He says, "Utsa waits so far." And here's these Jewish people learning Torah. He says, "Wow, we may be technically in exile, but we're living in a redemptive way. in a redemptive state of mind, in a redemptive state of being. And we are going to survive this. So he says like this: when the Jews are sleeping spiritually, God is also sleeping. But we can impact the opposite. When the Jews are in a state of redemption, of happiness, of breaking out of their limitations, we can do that. How do we do that? And that's the question. How can we break out of the state of exile? But first, Haman actually was a very smart man. Haman knew that the month of Adar is a bad month because Moshe passed away. Haman knew he can get the Jews to follow him and to worship and to bow down to him and to join in the festivities that he made in Achashverosh's palace. And this is why Haman came to Achashverosh. You know what he told Achashverosh? He said, Yeshnai am echad befuzar u'mefayrad bein ha'amim. There is a one nation who is scattered among the nations, who are different. What word did he use? Instead of saying that there is a nation, he says, Yeshnai am echad. The word Yeshnai, that there is a nation, has the word Yashan. Yashan means to sleep. There is a sleepy nation, he told Achashverosh. There's a nation that's asleep, and what happens if your enemies are asleep? You can wipe them out. You can kill them. He said, Achashverosh, don't worry. Don't worry, they're not going to fight against you. They're sleeping. This is our chance to go and attack the Jewish people. Mordechai and Esther says we have to figure out a way to prove that Haman is wrong. What did they do? They didn't come to Achashverosh and say, no, my people are not sleeping. They weren't fools. They realized that their people were sleeping. So as the leaders of the Jewish nation, what did they do? If your nation is sleeping, you can't say they're not sleeping. So how do you change the course of what's about to happen? How do you nullify the decree that is happening because they're sleeping? Do you know what Mordechai and Esther did? They came to the Jewish people and they said, let's pray to God. Let's fast. Let's give charity. Let's do acts of goodness. Let's love one another. Because when we are engaged in spiritual acts and doing good, do you know what happens? Automatically you wake up. Automatically you're not lying down. If you're laying down because you're depressed, do you know how to break out of it? Get your hiney out of that bed and go do some good. Go help somebody out. Go say a prayer in the synagogue or say some psalms. Mordechai and Esther said, you're saying that you're sleeping, you're saying our nation's sleeping, okay. I'm not going to argue that point, but I'm going to wake them up and I'm going to show you that they are awake. They're alive and well. And the Jewish nation. And the moment this happened, God says, I can't sleep either. Shh. How can I sleep when I see the Jewish nation is doing all these good acts? I can't. So Haman's allegation to the king Achashverosh was that the Jewish nation is sleeping. And it was a mirror of the heavenly Haman's allegations before God. Right? Haman came to God and said, your people are sleeping. The Jews had fallen asleep on the job. Their job is to be a light unto the nation. They've fallen asleep. As evidenced by their participation in the feast of Achashverosh and by the misdeeds which brought the decree upon them. A person should be treated according to his or her own behavior. If the Jews are indifferent to God, then God too must be different to them. After all, they're each shadowing one another. Esther didn't try to refute this argument, nor did Mordechai. So what did they do? They came and they said, we are going to pray. We're going to live a life of two very important words, of Mesiras Nefesh, of self-sacrifice. We're not going to be afraid of the nations that rule the world. We're not going to be dictated by them. We're going to live a life that is higher than them. To overcome the issues, You don't fight the issue head on. You have to reach beyond the issues. Reach beyond ordinary faculties and awaken the essence of the soul. Live above your means. Meaning to say, don't allow exile, the darkness, to allow you to continue to walk in disorganized manner in a troubled world where there's lots of obstacles that stand in the way. Surround yourself with holiness, with goodness, with a godly manner. You will then be able to lift yourself up. And in response, what happened? The moment the Jews started to respond to Achashverosh, to Mordechai, what happened? What happened on that faithful night? God could not sleep anymore. When the Jews are up, God is up. When he all of a sudden he hears the Jewish people singing and dancing, the Jewish people doing mitzvahs, he hears the jingle of the tzedakah box, he hears all those good things that are happening. God can't sleep. What's all that noise going on? They were sleeping until now. What's happening? What's all that excitement? What's all that noise? When he hears the kids singing, and Mordechai gathered 22,000 children together to pray and to sing and to do acts of goodness. God says, whoa, what's all that noise? What's keeping me up? Let me take a look. Let me see what is going on. And this is the deeper idea. That even in exile, Mordechai is telling us, perhaps maybe we're a little bit asleep. But the truth is that our hearts are fully awake. And all we have to do is awaken our hearts. When you awaken the heart, when you do good, you behave in a manner that is godly. Now that's a strong word, but in an easier term, when you behave in a manner that is not about you, but about somebody else, when we realize that we have to be more of an influence on those around us, not be influenced by those around us, then God can't sleep. He hears the noise that you're making. He hears the impact that we are having on those around us, and therefore God responds in this manner. And God can't sleep. And he says, wait a second, what does it say in the book? It says that you did this, you saved the king. I have to reward you. You were there for God. You accepted the Torah on Mount Sinai. Wow. What did I do for that? I'm going to dress you in the royal garments. I'm going to put you on the royal horse. Everything mimics exactly what's happening. God says, you, the Jewish nation, you accepted it then. You saved me from all the nations that didn't want the Torah. And you're the ones that are taking the Torah. This is why it says that by the story of Purim, the Jewish people concluded that which is started by the giving of the Torah on Mount Sinai 1,000 years earlier, 2,000 years earlier. No, about 1,000 years earlier. Why? Because then they only accepted it by force, but now they accepted it willingly. Because now they realized the beauty, the preciousness of the Torah. And God says, wow, you finally accepted the Torah. I'm going to treat you as a Mamleches Kohanim, a nation of kings, of priests, a holy nation. So the Medrash relates, what was it that disturbed God's sleep? It was the sound of the Jewish children studying Torah. Young children, before a bar mitzvah, ignoring the terrible situation, the Jews followed Mordechai, gathering the Jewish children together to study Torah. And in fact, this is what angered Haman. When he came and he saw these Jewish people, and he saw the Jewish children especially, and he sees them wearing the yarmulke, wearing their tzitzis, walking like a Jew, studying Torah, he says, I cannot beat them. And this answers our question. When did the miracle start? It started the night that God couldn't sleep. How was it that God slept? Because God was reflecting the image of the Jewish people who were sleeping. But now that the Jews woke up, God also is awake. And this is why we raise our voices when we say this story that the king couldn't sleep, because this is indeed the beginning of the miracle. Wow, God can't sleep because we are not sleeping anymore. We recognize that the job has to be done by only us. And it's also hinted in the words that we say. How are the Jewish people called in the book of the scroll of Esther? They're called by the name Yehudim, not Bnei Yisrael, the children of Israel, but they're called by the name of Jews. Why are they called by the name of Jews? The Talmud tells us that you're called the name of a Jew when you reject idol worship. The pivotal moment of the miracle was that sleep evaded God, and that caused sleep to evade King Achashverosh as well, ultimately bringing light, joy, celebration, and honor to the Jewish people. And these days are a reenactment in every generation. The Arizal famously writes that by recalling and reliving these events, we once again channel the same blessings again right now. And by reliving the message of Purim, both the literal story and the mystical one, we bring Jewish people, wherever they are and in whichever state they find themselves, to light, joy, celebration, and honor. This is also why one of the laws of reading the Megillah is you're not allowed to read the story of the Megillah backwards. If one reads the story backwards, one has not fulfilled their obligation. I don't know if any of you ever picked up a book and you read the ending of the book first. You wanted to see what happens in the end. Then you just kind of went through the beginning. Many times you read the end of the Megillah, you say, what happened? Oh, they were saved. Okay, now let me go through the whole story, see exactly what happened. So therefore, if you read it in that manner, you haven't fulfilled the obligation. Rosh Hashanah said there's actually a deeper meaning to why you're not allowed to read it backwards. And it's not literally backwards. He says, if you read the Megillah as something that happened back then, you have not fulfilled the obligation. You have to read the Megillah as if it's happening right now. The story is a current story. It's applicable. It is happening to us, and we have to follow the steps of the story to be called the Yehudim, the Jewish nation, who will rise above everything else to light, joy, celebration, and honor. Thank you very much for joining me. So good to see you all. Have a very good night, and we'll hopefully see you next week, same time, same place.
Beautiful, Rabbi, amazing. Thank you so much.